Welcome to Journaling with Nature, the podcast for those who want to turn curiosity into wonder, a pencil sketch into a rabbit hole of discovery, a moment of stillness into a life full of joy. I'm your host, Bethan Burton. Let's open the pages of our nature journals and explore this world together. Hello, this is episode 153. Before we get into the interview, I want to say thank you to you for your patience with me and the podcast and my patchy uploading at the moment. As we approach International Nature Journaling Week for 2024, this is the 5th year, can you believe it? A year goes around so quickly. But it's coming up soon and it's a lot to juggle, and I might be a little off schedule sometimes as we approach, but I've recently recorded interviews with some truly amazing creatives and I look forward to sharing them with you. Next week, I'll share a bit more about the themes that we've got coming up for International Nature Journaling Week, but today is an interview with British painter and printmaker Suzy Sharpe. I was first drawn to Suzy's work through her Impressions of Nature project, which is all about botanical Monor Printing. But when I dived into her work, I found that Suzy's artistic practice is multi-layered and motivated by a desire to make a difference in our world. In our conversation, we talked about experiencing history through the landscape of Cornwall, how nature connection is weaved through our traditions of poetry, writing and folk tales, the practice of botanical monoprinting, as well as lots of other topics. Let's listen. Suzy, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast today.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me. It's very exciting.
Yeah, I'm thrilled that you're here with me and I can't wait to dive into your story. I would really love to hear about your early nature exposure and your early memories of nature. I wonder if this connection that you have with nature has been with you since you were young.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, and it really makes me think back to when I first engaged with nature. And I believe I used to be completely enthralled by robins in the garden with my granddad, he died when I was 2.5, so I must have been very young at that
Yeah.
time. And robins have kind of been an intrinsic, a thing that I go to if I want to chat to nature. I go and talk to a robin, sort of thing. So I suppose that's my first engagement with nature, and because I grew up in a town, but we were very fortunate to have some fields around us, which were some of it was actually an old golf course that had become unused. And so I used to gravitate to those fields, and they were wild and they were large spaces. So yeah, I always wanted to be in wild spaces, even though that was quite difficult to access growing up in a town.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
yeah.
And has creativity been with you from the beginning?
Yeah, it has. I've always drawn. I've got
Mm.
and I kind of treasure the drawings that I've still got that were my childhood drawing, my very, very early childhood drawings, and they were always still of birds and animals. Actually, that seemed to be always what I drew. So, yeah, and actually, I found friendships quite challenging. I think it wasn't easy. I'm not a particularly gregarious, or I wasn't when I was a child particularly gregarious, and I think I used to draw a lot I used to spend a lot of time drawing, whereas other people might be playing out with friends. I would spend
Yeah.
my time drawing. So
Yeah.
yeah.
And so you studied fine art at a bachelor's level and at master's level as well. You studied illustration. Tell me about the unfolding of that path.
Yeah, I mean, it's what I intended to do when I left school, and I went to school to do a foundation, and unfortunately I had to leave because it was quite difficult for my parents to support me financially, so I had to leave and go and get a job, which I did, and I went into financial services, and then it wasn't until I'd had my own children and moved to Cornwall that I took that up again, really. I'd continued to draw and paint all the time, and I was drawing
Yeah.
animal portraits and things for people as commissions for people, but I didn't have the ability, the time, or the finances to study until after I'd had my children. I think I was 33 when I went back to college, and I did an access course. So that was my first sort of jump into art practice. So I was mixed in with lots of people from all different walks of life, and it was just an amazing transformative process that I went through. Yeah,
That's
turned everything
amazing.
around.
Yeah, I love that. I love that you came to it. It was obviously something that's been with you all this time, and life circumstances didn't permit you to dive into it at that time, but that it was still with you, that you didn't let go of the thread that art is through your life, and then you found it. You found the time. What was it like studying art? I would love to hear about what the art school experience was like for you.
I think I think it was transformative for me.
Mm,
It really helped me to look at myself. I think a good art education always should do that, actually, to help
mm,
you look at yourself and your own interests, and to help you develop a passion, and more of a passion for those interests. And I was fortunate in that that's what my art education did for me. And I think I always wanted to actually do illustration as a degree, but because of my children at home, childcare and etc., I wasn't actually able to study full-time illustration. So I was able to do the fine art course that I did, and so my work has always sort of, it struggled to be fine art and it struggles to be illustration, and it kind of sits a bit awkwardly in between those things. But it sort of tries to carve its own path, and I try to
mm,
force a bit of concept into it where maybe there doesn't need to be any, and so that's sort of the fine art head. But the tutors that I had were very supportive, and tried to encourage me down a sort of more conceptual route, I think, because I was working with fine art.
mm,
And it would be interesting to see what I would do if I'd done illustration at degree level. It probably would ended up quite differently. Oddly, when I went on to do my masters, I then ended up doing a series of very conceptual paintings for my
mm.
final piece, so kind of went completely against illustration as well. So my degree was kind of very illustrative when it should have been more fine art, and my MA that should have been illustration ended up, maybe that's just me being awkward.
Do you want to talk about your MA illustrations, because they're quite impactful. I saw them online, and I'd
Mm.
love to hear more about that.
Yeah, they ended up being a very self-contained project,
Mm.
and they were quite dark, and was all about that, the relationship between humans and animals. But I feel like I went down quite a dark path,
Yes.
and
Yes.
it was actually quite destructive of me personally as well.
Mm.
It it changed my worldview a little, or it led my worldview down a path that I really couldn't have stayed in, I
Mm.
don't think.
Mm. Mm.
I found it really difficult to be constantly referencing the traumatic things that were happening to wildlife and nature
Yes.
and animals and things like that, and so I had to kind of take a step back from that, really,
Mm.
and lighten up a lot. Whereas it's still there and it's still very relevant,
Yes.
but I
Yes.
I don't focus on it now in my artwork, because I also feel that people just didn't really. It's quite difficult to exhibit that sort of work. There's only a
Yes.
very small number of places that you can really get that out into the world, except the internet. So, yeah.
It's an interesting thing. I think a lot about this, that people who are working in this space around things that are the devastating things that are happening in our world, ecologically or socially, or with the climate, it can take its toll on
Mm,
people. And I think that coming back to the joy in nature journaling or nature art or immersion in nature is something that's really necessary if you're going to continue that sort of work. I think that a re-immersion or a refueling almost in the natural world with joy, with that connective experience, I think is really important and can then lead you to keep going. I'm
yeah,
not sure
that
what
that
you think about that.
yeah, no, I agree entirely, and I think that idea of sort of recording and celebrating it
Yes.
being aware of it, noting it, celebrating it, recording
Mm.
it, it has it's an entirely positive thing, isn't it?
Yes.
But it's also recording things for posterity as well. If
Yes.
I was reminded only the other morning that ringed plovers used to nest on our beaches, and they no longer do that because the
Oh,
beaches have become
really?
too busy now. So in Cornwall, and they still nest on the Isles of Scilly, which is a little archipelago just off the coast of Cornwall, and they still nest there, and they're very much trying to protect those nest
Mm.
sites now. And so it's really important for us to note these things, I think, but with a celebratory attitude, which I think it enables us to create a positive space around it, because we're so bombarded all the time by negatives, aren't we? So, which doesn't do
That's
your mental health any good at all, I don't
Yes,
think.
that's right. You've mentioned Cornwall and some of the nature around you. I would love to hear more about your part of the world. Can you describe the natural areas that you're able to access near you? What you see when you go outside?
I live in the sort of Midwest of Cornwall, rurally, so I'm sort of in the centre of one of the narrowest bits of Cornwall. But so I look out from my house across fields, and I could just about from the fields I can just about see both coasts, the coast on either side. So
Wow.
we're quite high, and it's quite windy, and we tend to get a bit of a battering from the weather here, particularly this year actually. But so I live rurally. We get a lot of migratory thrushes and things like that visit us, and gulls going over. We get farmland birds such as rooks and crows and jackdaws, and I also get garden birds, blackbirds, robins. I heard the first we have a local cuckoo, and it must be, I mean, I don't cuckoos don't live as long as I've been hearing this cuckoo returning, so there must be a series of cuckoos, I think. But it returned um, on the 21st of April last year, and today is the first time I've heard it this year. So our
Ah,
cuckoo
same
has
day.
returned. Yeah,
No,
so
that's
it's just a day
amazing.
apart, which is amazing.
Wow.
Yeah,
That is
and
really cool.
things like I use the Merlin Bird app on my phone actually, which I find so valuable because it alerts me to a sound, and then I can look, and then once I know what the
Ah.
bird is, then I can find it and I can look for it. So I find that so useful. So I heard a willow warbler as well today, which was amazing, and then was able to spot it in the trees. So yeah, so that's very locally. I have sort of farmland birds around me. And but then we're the north coast is a rocky cliff faces with sandy beaches, but and we get a whole variety of amazing seabirds, a really rich variety of seabirds actually, from gannets passing through to guillemots and razorbills nesting on the coast, and shags and cormorants and oyster catchers, just a whole plethora, and it's so rich. It's and in the winter we get migratory lapwings who form flocks in the estuaries, and they
Wow.
wheel around, and those are just like, they just take my breath away. They're just so amazing to just watch. And where I see the lapwings, there's a really busy road that passes by. So yeah,
Right.
I often film these wonderful scenes of lapwings and have to cut the sound out because all you can hear is this traffic. But yeah, no, an amazing spectacle, traffic or no traffic, I think. But
Yeah, yeah,
yeah.
yeah. It seems to me like birds are a big part of your experience of nature. Tell me about your love of birds.
Yeah, I think probably because birds are all around us, and they kind of they exist despite us, don't they? They just keep going around,
Yeah.
even in the sort of the inner cities. There's still magpies and rooks and crows and things like that. So they're always around us, and often outwitting us as well. And particularly in Cornwall, the herring gulls outwit us all the time. They tear apart our bin bags and throw rubbish everywhere, and there's quite a difficult relationship sometimes between gulls and humans in Cornwall. But and I think that's it. They are always around. They're
Yeah.
always in terms of wild animals anyway. I also am surrounded by farmed animals, but in terms of
Mm.
wild animals, the birds are always they're sort of ever present, aren't they? We do also have grey seals on the coast though, so a
Yes.
really nice number of grey seals and occasional whale spottings. And but it is birds that really touch me, I think.
Many, many years ago, when I was 20 years old, I lived in England for some time and
Oh,
we spent a bit of time in Newquay on the Cornwall coast.
oh
And
yeah.
I did not know this about you having seals there, and we walked down. I thought it was going to be warm. It wasn't warm. We had coats on. We're on the coast, and I paddled in the sea, and I've never felt temperatures colder than that in terms of seawater, but it was beautiful. But I remember climbing down some rocks and then being surprised by this enormous seal that I was not expecting to see there, but it was an absolute delight.
Yeah, they are. They're so incredible. And they're actually really rare. I believe the figure is there's less grey seals than there is African elephants. So they're just
Really?
really
Oh, wow.
incredibly rare. And unfortunately are under a lot of pressure from
Mm,
people because Cornwall's just such a beautiful place. It's a great holiday resort for
yes.
lots of people come here because of its beauty, but also because there's lots to do here, and
Mm,
you can get out on paddle boards and kayaks and boats, and unfortunately, all of those have an impact on our wildlife as well. So it's a
yes.
really difficult balance, I think, to experience wildlife whilst also not impacting it negatively.
Yes,
It's something that
absolutely.
I think we all need to be really mindful of.
Mm-mm. When I'm in England, I think about history so much because history just seems so present in everything, in the landscape and the layers of history that have unfolded and been buried and unearthed over the time. It just seems to me that it's a landscape of history. And I saw a video that you did, and you were looking for a chapel or looking for the remains of a chapel, and
Oh
it
yeah.
reminded me of my own experiences in England, where you'll just be walking along and you'll find an old church or something that's half derelict and covered in forest. And I would love to hear your experience of history in the landscape and the way that that is present
Mm.
when you're out there.
Yeah, it is. I mean, it's interesting to hear your perspective on that actually, because I kind of have always lived with it, so
Yeah, yeah,
it's just here.
yeah.
But moving to Cornwall, I'm surrounded by Neolithic and Bronze Age monuments as well. So
Yeah.
there's a Bronze Age barrow just up the hill. It's called Hangman's Barrow, and it's derelict and it's been robbed on a number of occasions, I think, over the centuries. But and then I got involved in the resurrection of a quoit with the capstone on the top. It had fallen down, and it dated back to 3000 BC or something. So
That's
we did
amazing
a,
to me.
I know, we did an archaeological dig, and we found things like whetstones to sharpen axes and things like that. We found arrowheads. We found uh, all sorts of different things, pottery from throughout the ages, and we found Bakelite and crisp packets from the 1970s, and it was just that peeling back the layers of
Yes,
time,
that's it.
and that experience that idea that people had used that place as a meeting place for 5,000 years, and you know those people kind of, you could see them stretching back into
Yes.
history, and still coming to this little. So that when I, in one of my films, when I visit the quoit, that's the quoit that fell down. So yeah, and just the idea of it, I think, is more amazing than the stones in some ways. You know, that idea of that history, and of that connection to those people who 5,000 years ago were still coming to that place. It's
Yes.
remarkable, isn't it?
It brings history to life and the human stories.
Mm. Yes, and I mean the chapel that I visited. I mean, I'm probably jumping ahead a little bit here, but the chapel I visited, there's also a story about Saint Aya, who came over from Ireland on a leaf. Apparently, she sailed from Ireland on a leaf, and then I think she ended up, that was like as saints had their cells, or their sort of little chapels that they made for themselves, and I think she kind of hid out there for a while at that little chapel, and been rebuilt over the years and now has become derelict. But yeah, and nobody would know it was there either. It's only that I was involved with the same people who were doing
Yeah.
the archaeological dig, sort of alerted me to it being there, or I would never have known it was there.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. It's like everyday life is lived in amongst the history.
it is, yeah,
Hmm.
yeah, definitely.
Here, as we're talking, I'm sitting with a blanket over my knees because it's suddenly cold here, and we don't have extreme weather changes, but we're definitely going into the cooler season now. And I'm wondering, you mentioned the return of the cuckoo, but I'm wondering what else you've noticed as the season starts to change.
Yeah, I'm also sitting with a blanket over my knees because it's not that warm here. The sun is finally out. We've had so much rain this year. It's just not stopped all winter, and it's felt quite. And so it's just so lovely to see the sun, and everything it's just bursting now. It's just
Yeah,
everything is coming out, and it feels really overwhelming somehow, particularly when I'm trying to print from these things or journal from them. It's like
yeah,
everything's coming at once all of a
yeah,
sudden, and I can't keep up with it. And I think actually that's why I journal, so that I can try and
yeah,
make sense of it and keep up with it.
yeah.
But yeah, so I've noticed lots of birds with nest material,
Oh,
and
fabulous.
bird song is the thing. I think that's the kind of the start of
Mm.
because the birds, despite the rain, they were still on that sort of treadmill that they needed to start building a nest. And I've got a pair of magpies that nest in the garden, and there's a pair of wood pigeons that are going around together. They're more together. They're always together, but they're more together than they were, and they're picking up nest material and just dropping it. They don't seem to have a particular plan. They just pick it up and drop it somewhere else. But yeah, so again, I mean, although the daffodils, they're commercially grown in Cornwall, so they tend to come early anyway. But this year, the first ones were out in my garden in December because it was
Wow,
so mild. So
wow.
yeah, so spring seems to have been trying to get going for a long time, but now it's upon us. And
Yes.
the bluebells are one of the wonderful things around here at the moment. So in my garden, but there's some woodlands that I'll revisit in my little films, but they're going to be blue and smelling amazing in the next week, I should think. So that will be great.
How delightful. I think a lot about the experience of awe in nature, and I would love to hear about your experiences of awe and what makes you feel that feeling.
I think I'm going to go back to birds again.
Yeah.
I went to Hamwall, it is Hamwall, where it's an RSPB reserve, and I went there to look at murmurating starlings, and we have them that visit a place called Marazion Marsh, and standing underneath a flock of starlings, like hundreds of thousands of starlings, and they're just kind of, it almost feels like they're lifting you with their wings. I find it
Wow.
just an all senses experience, I think, and completely in awe of it. But I mentioned the lapwings before. I think they're almost comparable to the starlings.
Mm.
But
Mm.
yeah, I just inwardly and outwardly gasp because they're just so incredible. But I think I mean, we don't have large herds of anything, but I think that would probably have the same effect on me. It's that
Yes.
feeling very small by comparison
Yes.
with what's around you, or sometimes the night sky, and that can also have the same effect on you, or a powerful sea, or lots of things. Even the smell of the gorse on a warm day, because it smells so powerfully of coconut, and you just sometimes hit by it. So yeah, I think anything in large quantity can
Yes.
make you. But also just finding a flower that I've never found before, it's like, oh my gosh, I'm so excited.
Yes. I found something very small the other day, but it was totally awe-inspiring in just like the most bizarre way. It was I saw, because I'm always drawn to leaf skeletons, and I
Mm,
saw a leaf skeleton that was on the plant. Usually a leaf skeleton you might find in the leaf litter or in the bottom of a creek, but this leaf skeleton was on on a living plant, and I looked closer because it surprised me to see that there. And I realized that there was all these little tiny larvae lined up
ah,
on the leaf, halfway down a leaf, as if stripping the thing from the top to the bottom. And they were all across the front of the leaf and all across the back of the leaf together, sort of stripping it down in this weird science fiction sort of way. And I did the
wow.
same thing. I just gasped. And it turns
Uh-huh.
out that they're called Callistemon sawfly larvae, and they're incredibly strange, like something from a science fiction movie. But that was one of those those times when something very small can bring
Yeah.
that experience of awe, which is really exciting.
Yeah, I've got I've got two grandchildren and one on the way actually, and my he's called Barnaby. He's just 3, and looking after him has made me re-see things, I think, and
Yes.
and re-see the awe in the world, because he'll pick up a worm. He's like, Nana, a wiggly worm, a wiggly worm, and he's so excited that he's found a wiggly worm, and it's kind of reignites that sense of awe in the everyday, in the
Yes.
tiny, doesn't it? And yeah, and seeing an earwig or a millipede or something, he's so
Yes.
excited that he's seeing these things. And I think looking at the world through the eyes of a child is an amazing thing to be able to do again. So
Yes,
yeah.
that reminds me of, we had a friend's son come to stay with us many years ago, and he was about 6 years old, and he was from New Zealand. And here in Australia, where I'm from, we have lots and lots of little skinks, lots of little lizards, and they just are so common, or they were in my childhood so common that they were completely unremarkable. But he ran in one day and he said, "Look at this," and he grabbed me by the hand and he took me out and he said, "Look, there's a little lizard," and and I went, "Wow, that is actually really amazing," and I'd forgotten to be amazed by that, and it's joyful
Yeah.
to be reminded.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and the things like sparrows. I have sparrows nest in my house everywhere. They're all over the place in the summer, and this just seems to be there's just like they're just going in and out of everything. But apparently in London now they're extinct in London.
Oh,
So
wow.
and it's like you these things are so everyday that you don't ever believe that they will reduce,
Yeah.
and they have done in some places for I don't know what I don't think anybody really knows why, but
Mm-mm.
they have reduced drastically. So the everyday then becomes a real
Yes.
rarity, doesn't it? So
Yeah,
and more amazing because of it, I think.
absolutely. This
Yeah.
A big feature of your work is this interconnectedness between humans and the natural world. And I would love to hear more about that for you. We've talked a bit about this experience of humans and nature, and I'd love to hear about how that plays out for you on your daily experiences of nature.
Yeah, I think I really need the connection with nature. I feel so claustrophobic if I'm in towns and
Mm.
cities now. I feel
Mm-hmm.
completely. I just sort of stand there staring, feeling completely culture shocked if I've not got. Well, but even though I live I can look out of my window and I'm looking across fields. Sometimes I just needing to get out into
Mm.
nature and walking, actually moving. It seems to
Mm.
be. It sort of simplifies everything, and it helps me to be able it gives me the space to think about everything, anything, any problems or things that I'm worrying about or concerning myself about. It kind of just settles it all down, I think, and helps me to think. And it is a it can own I can't walk around the house and feel like that. I do have to be
Yeah.
outside in nature to feel like that. So I really do need that, I think, in my life, whilst also being really mindful that nature doesn't necessarily need me tramping around all the time. But so I try to walk lightly on the earth where I, as much as possible, obviously. But yeah, I need its presence in my life. It's just it's
Yeah.
almost it's as necessary to me as food, really.
Yeah, it's inbuilt in us, isn't it? This need for nature. And we put ourselves in these unnatural spaces, we put ourselves in buildings, we put ourselves under fluorescent light at nighttime and whatever it is, but there's a calling inside of
Mm.
us, and it sounds like that's how it manifests for you, that you just don't feel quite right unless you're outdoors sometimes.
No, I don't. Even if it's rainy or windy, it's still better
Yeah.
that's off very often than sitting in. Yeah,
Yeah.
and I struggle in the winter when it's dark and there's less time in the day because I'm working or whatever, and
Yeah.
so the daylight times are taken up. I used to walk a lot in the dark. Actually, I don't do it anymore so much, but I used to just have to get out and just walk in the dark because
Yeah.
it was just so necessary for me to get out. But yeah, that's another change of the season. I'm so grateful
Yeah.
for the light extending.
Yeah, it must change your mood as well. I found when I was in England, quite often you'd encounter people who didn't really want to talk, or were in their own bubble of thoughts, and then if the sun was out, the mood changed and people were engaging on the street with each other in a whole different way.
Yeah, it does make a huge difference, I think. Just yeah, I think the British are renowned for always talking about the weather, aren't we? So because it can be,
Because
it's
it's so
and
significant.
it's so significant, and I think I'd really noticed that moving from a town. I worked in the centre of Manchester at one point as well, and you don't really notice the weather so much, I don't think, if you work in a town or a city. And when I moved to Cornwall and we lived up on top of a hill, and it was like this wind was just coming at us constantly, and horizontal rain, and so the weather was just so present in your life.
Yeah.
And where I lived as well, I used to take my children to school down the hill, and I'd get there in all my hood and my hat and my coat and everything, and I'd get down to the bottom of the hill, and people would be in shorts and t-shirts. It was like the
It's a
difference
different
in the weather from the
microclimate.
top of the hill to the bottom
Yeah.
of the hill was just remarkable.
That's really
Yeah, so
funny.
yeah, the weather is something that's just so present in our lives, I think. And I think because Cornwall's a very narrow little peninsula as well, we do get a bit of a battering by the weather. So it's the stormy seas and everything, they really do affect our lives.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Your work is also inspired by the way this interconnectedness that we've been talking about manifests in our poetry and storytelling and myths and folk tales. You touched a little bit on folk tales before, but I would love to hear more about this connection and how storytelling is important in this connection or bound up with this connection with nature.
Yeah, I think back, well, forever, I think we have always used animals to sort of construct our own personalities in a way, with headdresses or with storytelling. Some things we aren't aware of, but in the caves, when they were in the cave paintings, there was always animals in those paintings, and I think we've always used the animal symbolism to try and construct our personality or to make sense of our personalities in some way, and. Yeah, the dissertation that I wrote for my master's was called "The Stories We Tell Ourselves Over and Over Again," and what I was looking at was those retelling of these folk tales in different guises. So, in Greek mythology, throughout the Bible, in the story of Gilgamesh, back and in Ovid's poetry, again, ancient Greek sort of thing, and then to sort of more Celtic folk tales and things like that as well. That we keep retelling these same stories. It's like we can't really grasp it, and they've all got animals in them. They're all kind of telling them as this same story, but we need to keep telling ourselves because we struggle to hold on to those ideas, even though they can be quite simple. That we're struggling to hold on to them, and we seem to always use animals to help us to explain those things as a metaphor. In my world, anyway, they do.
That's really interesting. Just as you're talking about that, it just brings up. I was just suddenly thinking of, the work of Beatrix Potter, or the way that animals are anthropomorphized in many children's books, and how maybe that helps tell a story that through animals that have human traits somehow makes them easier to understand or more accessible in some way.
Yeah, the artist Paula Rego, who I researched quite a lot actually, and she uses a lot of animals in her paintings. And she talked about the way that if you use humans in those situations, it becomes over sentimentalized. But if you use animals as a metaphor, then it's like a step away, and somehow we're able to uh, understand it a little bit better when you take that step away from the human condition sort of thing, and you put it into an animal. She said, yeah, I've always been fascinated by the anthropomorphizing of humans, or that changeability where we dress little animals up as humans and we place our own ideas onto them. Sometimes I'm not sure it helps them a great deal that we do that because they have their own lives. They have their own experiences and their own requirements and their own path that they're on, don't they? And us putting our own lives and our own ideas and paths, the idea of wearing a bonnet or anything like that, it's just like it's not a thing for them, is they? So
I wonder what they're thinking. What is this big human doing to me right now?
yeah when people dress their dogs in clothes. And I did just slightly different. I did a project where I was looking at birds who had carrier pigeons, and they were like in the Second and First World War. These pigeons were flying and taking messages and things like that, and obviously lots of them died, but a lot of them saved a lot of people's lives as well. And they would give them medals, and I thought how strange that would be
How
to be a pigeon and
superfluous.
receive a medal. What would the pigeon think of receiving a medal?
That
I
is
just thought that was quite an
hilarious.
interesting idea, really. Yeah.
I'm wondering about the art and the nature writing and the nature themed literature that have been influential on you, that have informed you as an artist.
Yeah, I thought this was really interesting actually to sort of revisit. I think in terms of nature, I didn't realize it at the time, but I'm dyslexic, and so I always gravitated towards poetry because it was short, I think, so that I could read it and I didn't have to labor over, over long texts or
Yeah,
so.
yeah.
I've never really been a novel reader as such, but I was always quite drawn to poetry, and I think poetry still is a big part of my engagement. I find it really, I think it's something about that rhythm. And again, talking when I read stories to my grandson, if it's got some sort of rhythm and poetry to it, then I find it much easier to read to him out loud
Yeah.
than I would do a story. So poets, Mary Oliver, I think, sort of stands out as being a
Yes.
huge influence. I particularly love to hear her reading when she read her poetry. I just love to hear that. But John Clare as well, also a wonderful nature poet of I think it's the 18. I don't know when he was born actually. I feel I should know that because I use his poetry a lot in my own newsletters and things. But yeah, again, and his poems really resonate with my idea of wildlife as well. It's his lived experience of wildlife, I think, and the same with Mary Oliver. So, and then also writers, Robert Macfarlane, he wrote a
Yes.
book called The Wild Places, and then
Yes.
Mark Cocker, who wrote Crow Country. So, again, those were sort of fairly gentle books that I read. And again, I like that sort of book rather than fiction. I'll gravitate
Yes.
towards that rather than a fiction book. But having said that, I mentioned Ovid's poetry, and I love that again. Well, I mean, they're not really written as rhyming poems, but they're quite short. So um, I think this idea of me being dyslexic unknowingly has made me gravitate towards things that are short. So Clarissa Pinkola Estes, her Women Who Run with the Wolves, and the stories
Yes.
that are told in that. So those are quite short folk tales as well. And Ovid's poems, The Metamorphosis, so poems about Erysichthon and Actaeon, and they seem to, even though they're so ancient, they seem to still be very contemporary in their subject matter. They're particularly the poem, the Erysichthon one, where he cuts down a huge tree and the whole of the community are against it. A wonderful poem. It's probably, I don't want to spoil it for anybody, so
Okay.
I won't go on. But then in sort of academic study, I was looking at people like Jacques Derrida, who wrote The Animal Wherefore I Am, which was about his experience of meeting his cat on the landing when he was in the night. So he was, as he said, him and this cat had a sort of visual exchange, and what that experience was like. And then also activists such as Peter Singer, Animal Liberation, and Derek Jensen as well, who he wrote a book called Language Other Than Words, and that was it really made me think a lot about the way we are with animals and the way we live with them around, and the way we respect or don't respect them as well. And yeah,
Wow.
and then Suko, who's an illustrator who lives in America now, but her images are very difficult to look at. But she's an animal activist, and yeah, so quite a breadth. My
Yes.
dissertation had a 17-page bibliography, so
Wow.
I love research. I do love research.
Researching
actually.
is part of it for you, is it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah. So, yeah. So, but it tends to be quite broad. So, when I was doing my dissertation, I was very good at looking through indexes to find things that I really wanted to know about because I had quite a particular interest. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Oh,
Yeah.
it's lovely to
So
hear all
although
those influences.
Yeah, quite well read, but in a very small field.
Tell me, do you think the practice of writing about nature or making art about nature can help us become more compassionate towards the natural world?
I really hope so. Yeah. I think it should. I think it really should do, because
Yeah.
I think a close attention to anything helps you
Mm.
to respect it more and to
Yes.
understand it more. So definitely think it should do that, and I think we should be encouraging um, looking at it more, perhaps from a bit of a distance actually. And I think that's where nature journaling is
Mm.
so valuable, because you are
Mm.
looking at it from a bit of a distance. You're not doing anything to nature, you're just observing it, aren't you?
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's where it's so valuable actually. But yeah, I really hope that looking at nature will help us to improve our relationship with it.
Speaking about that, about compassion towards the natural world and making a difference, you've collaborated with different projects and charities and organizations that raise awareness of environmental issues. And I'd love to hear more about that, about the collaborations you've had with different groups and what that means to you.
Yeah, I think it's kind of the best use of my work, really. If my
Yeah.
work can raise awareness and raise money for charities, I think that's just an amazing thing to be able to do. I was asked to illustrate to put in an illustration for the British Trust for Ornithology's red book, Red 67, and it was about and the red listed 67 red listed birds at the time, and that was it was just a really great thing to be involved in, with 67 other artists and 67 writers, and each
Wow.
of us were sort of collaborating on a project that is trying to raise awareness of things happening in the world.
Yeah.
And I think all of the projects that I've got involved in have been kind of in that vein, really, sort of trying to raise awareness and trying to make a difference, and maybe even to bring the idea, either artwork or nature, to a wider audience in some way.
Yes.
Yeah, and
That's fantastic.
I think it's one of the best things that my work can do. Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about your practice as an artist, and one thing in particular. So for my listeners, a sketchbook is part of often part of their creative expression, and I'm wondering about your use of sketchbooks and how sketchbooks influence your artistic practice.
I'm quite bad with the sketchbook actually, because I like to work quite quickly with wet media, and I
Yeah.
just find I just get myself into a dreadful mess with it, and everything's just stuck together. So I tend to work on single sheets of paper quite a lot.
Hmm.
I do keep I've got lots of sketchbooks, and I'll take a sketchbook out with me, and I do sketch in it, but unfortunately those pages do have a tendency to stick together, so they're never the beautiful things that other people's are. They are a working document, I think, or
Yes,
a
but
place
that's
to
the
make
value in it.
notes, or
Yeah,
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 but they're never beautiful like other
yeah.
people. I always admire other people's beautiful sketchbooks. Mine are usually just stuck together. But yeah, so and that's, for the nature journaling side of things as well, that's I'm always struggling to work out how it should look and how it should be. So again, I tend to work on these single sheets of paper. So
I very much am of the school of thought that nature journaling doesn't have a look, it doesn't have a type, it doesn't have a formula, that it can be absolutely whatever works for you, whatever helps you connect with nature. And I've seen some of your sketchbook flip throughs online on YouTube, and all the birds and the quick sketching of birds and capturing them out in their environment is just absolutely beautiful.
yeah, and I think we do that. I do that to understand them and to see them better as well. It helps me
Yeah.
to that act of sitting down with a sketchbook and drawing. And it doesn't matter what the drawing looks like. It's about
Yes.
looking, I think,
Yes.
isn't it, really? And when you're trying to draw something, you suddenly notice the stripe over the eye,
Yes.
or the
That's it.
different shade in the beak or something like that, don't you? But which you wouldn't notice if you were just photographing it, or you might not notice if you're photographing it, or if you were just purely observing it. So
Yeah.
yeah, I think drawing, whether you're drawing in a nature journal or a sketchbook or a single sheet of paper, I think it really helps us to focus and to see things better.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So printmaking seems to be a really big part of your work, and different types of printmaking. What draws you to printmaking over other forms of art?
I think because I came to printmaking as a student,
Mm.
and prior to being a student, I was painting very, very detailed animal portraits, and I still find it really hard not to do that, because what I would rather do with my work now is capture energy or
Mm.
expression or something like that. And printmaking is a stage away from that really detailed drawing.
Mm.
I kind of can't be that detailed with printmaking, so I think it helps me to work in a more creative way. Really, there's something about using a media like monoprinting or something that there's so many happy accidents that you know are going to happen, and you can't really control it completely. That it allows you to be a little bit more gentle with yourself, I think,
I
and
think it's, as you're
allows you
talking,
freedom.
yeah, as you're talking, it seems to me that many artists, especially maybe artists who are formally trained, a lot of the work that you do is unlearning the tightness or unlearning the
Mm.
perfection and trying to be looser. Yeah, I just notice a
Yeah,
lot of artists trying to be looser, and I think that that is
yeah.
often a process of unlearning.
Yeah, I think the formally trained actually came from school though. I think that's where
Okay.
one of the I wasn't particularly academic at school, and one of the things that I could do was draw quite well. So
Hmm.
I was often the praise that I got, if I
Yes.
got praise, it was often for my drawing skill. So I think I was encouraged to draw accurately and
Realistically. Hmm.
realistically. But in my degree, that was not definitely not a thing.
Okay.
Although we were encouraged to know how to draw and then to decide how you're going to use that skill, and it
Yes.
might not be to draw well, it might be to do
Hmm.
something else with it. But I think we kind of were unlearning it to a certain extent on my degree, which
Yeah.
it was a I think it was a freeing situation again with the access course, because it was sort of I suppose it was at a level of our A levels here, so that was more about being learning to draw in a particular way, so looking at perspective and accuracy and those sorts of things. But as soon as I got to my degree, it was a kind of, well, so you can draw, so what are you going to do
Yes.
with it, sort of thing.
Next thing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lots of
Yeah.
people could do that. So how are you going to make it your own, I think.
Mm. Mm.
And
That's an
I think
interesting feature of it.
it is, and I think drawing accurately can sometimes leave it a bit. It can make it look a bit, make your work indistinguishable from somebody
Mm.
else's because it's so accurate. Because
Hmm.
if it's going to be accurate, then it's going to be like the thing. So to a certain extent, anybody can with that skill can do
Mm.
that exact same thing. Whereas when you're creating something that's more from yourself, nobody else can do that. That's just you. The only person that
Yeah.
can do it is you, because you're coming from a different place. So
Yeah, what a lovely reflection. Yes, finding your own style, finding what makes your work unique is a life's work in itself, isn't it?
yeah, but it's something we were born with, and like you
Yeah.
say, you have to unlearn all these things that even I'm very mindful of it again with my grandson, that he'll bring me a picture and it's beautiful, colourful, scribbly, round
Yeah.
things,
Yeah,
and I'm very mindful not to say, "Oh, is that Nana?" Because if I
yeah.
say that, I'm actually asking him if it's accurate, aren't I? And
Yeah.
what I want to do is see his expression of the world in his drawing rather than ask him
Yeah.
if it is something or if it's an accurate representation of something.
Yeah, I have the same experience with my son, and I usually say, "Tell me about this." I'll say, "Wow, look what you
Mm.
did. Tell me about this." And that gives them the chance to say it. What do you say instead of saying, "Is that Nana?" What do you say to encourage him to speak more about his creation?
Very much the same thing, actually.
Mm.
Yeah, yeah. Tell me about it. It's asking a
Yeah.
question rather than making an assumption. He was drawing with water on a pavement the other day, and he was saying, "Here's the ear," and the ear was in the same place as the eye, and then there's a smiley face somewhere out of the face, and a smiley mouth out of the face, and I just thought it was great that
Yes.
he was exploring this space physically in
Yes.
drawing, but nothing was necessarily. It was just I decided to put the mouth over there, so that's where it's
Because
going
you
to be.
can. Yeah,
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 because I can. Yeah, and
yeah.
it was still a mouth to him, and it was absolutely fine.
I'd love to go back a little and I wonder if you could describe what monoprinting is. The way I came to your work was through Instagram, and you put these incredible videos of yourself making monoprints of things you find in nature. And I'd love for you, for the listener, to describe what a monoprint is, and then maybe we can talk about how you go about making a monoprint of something you've found in your nearby nature.
Okay, a monoprint is a unique a single unique print of something, but monoprinting is really broad as well. So it can be a drawing process. It can be you can distress the surface of a plate and stick it through. It can be a very abstract process, stick it through a press, but you can also take impressions from things as well. And with the Instagram, the Impressions of Nature project, it's about inking up, rolling ink over a plant or another thing. It can be lace, or I've done it with stockings and things like that. So you can roll ink over pretty much anything, and then place paper over the top of it, rub over the surface, and you get a beautiful imprint, which, as far as I can see, requires me to have no skill whatsoever. The plant does all the work for me, which actually is an awe-inspiring thing for me, that this plant has produced this amazing print for me. So yeah, and that's really, it's such a simple process, but such a delightful process that picks up details that you just wouldn't notice in the plant if you didn't use that. So like hairs on the stems and things, you just, incredible details that you just wouldn't pick up.
I love watching your impressions, because you put the ink on and then you put the plant down, and it's almost like you get two prints for one, because you slowly remove the top layer and then you remove the plant, and so you've got a print on that piece and a print on that piece. It's lovely to see that unfolding of like, what's the surprise here?
Yeah, and you get two completely different prints from either side. So ultimately, I suppose the top sheet is the sacrificial sheet, and that's the one I'm pressing the plant onto the other. The bottom sheet is the actual print, but I usually keep both of them because they're both usually lovely. So I don't really distinguish, which means that I have like a lot of prints because I've kept all of them, sort of thing. So yeah, and that there is although they are taken from exactly the same plant at exactly the same time with the same ink, they are very unique still.
Yes.
So yeah, and it's an amazing process to me every time I do it. So, and I just love that other people are doing it as well. So it's just such a great thing to share, and a great way, I think, for people to engage with their gardens, or the world outside them.
Yeah. I love that you talked a bit on your website about the Impressions of Nature project, and how you create a project or a scaffolding for yourself to explore a subject. And I'd love to hear about the process of that, about the process of making a frame for yourself to work within, and how that helps you creatively.
I think it's a bit of a hangover from my educational experience, and something that I also do with my own students. We work very much with modules all the time, so each module has a proposal of study, and that's exactly how I worked when I was studying as well. But I think when you have a busy life, if you have written a proposal of study and you know what you're going to do, you can kind of pick it up and drop it much more readily. And I think, and that's why I tend to have these projects, because I don't always feel like painting or drawing, but I might have the time, an hour or something. I might have pressed some flowers, and I think, well, I'll just go and print those, and then and that goes with that project, sort of thing. So for me, having projects to work with help me to, when I don't really have the time to think about how I'm going to create paintings and things like that, then it enables me to just get on with something in a short period of time.
Yeah, that's a really wonderful way to keep things moving, especially in times when you might be busy or uninspired, or whatever the barrier might be. Then you've got the structure and you know how to do that in that allocated time.
Yes, yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's the theory anyway.
You mentioned your students. I'd love for you to develop that and tell me about your teaching practice, because you teach people how to be creative.
Yes, I'm very fortunate to be able to teach on a multidisciplinary degree level course at
Wow.
the local college, and the course itself works with printmaking and painting and drawing, but also ceramics and graphic design. So
Oh,
our
wow.
students are able to like mix all these wonderful medias together and come out with unique outcomes, which is just great for them. I would have liked to have done that course actually
Yes.
when I was studying, because it would just be, I can't imagine, well, I can kind of imagine the wonderful things I might have made, but
Yeah.
to be able to mix media and to cross over printmaking with ceramics is just a really wonderful thing. So it's really inspiring for me to teach on that course.
Yeah.
And to my way of teaching is always to try to help students to become their unique creative self, because that's
Mm.
who they are, and to help them to find what inspires them, what they're passionate about, and then how are they going to communicate that to the world in their own way. And I think that's a really important thing within my teaching to
Yeah.
do that. I never think that it's my job to be prescriptive about
Mm.
the way they should work or anything like that. I want them very much to have their own self-expression of their unique creative self.
And I saw a video of your studio space, or the space where you teach, and there was this incredibly old, beautiful printing press. Can you tell me about this?
The Colombian Press, it is, there some, quite a lot of them have an Instagram following actually, these presses,
The
and
presses
it's got a
themselves.
yeah, the presses themselves, it's got a number on it, and I think it dates back to 1839. So it's always a bit of a like, I hope that not on my watch will we break it sort of
Oh,
thing, because it's
goodness.
been around for so long. But it is an amazing piece of kit, and actually historically it's very much like it's on the same format as the first printing presses that were developed by Gutenberg in the
Wow.
1400s. It's like it's almost exactly the same as that. So again, we're talking about history, and you've still got that history. And whilst probably the Intaglio, the rolling press, is the better one for doing mono printing with, I still just like to use the other one because it's such a beautiful piece of kit. So yeah, because that's a relief press, it just takes a print from the surface, whereas the Intaglio press will push the paper into the plate or whatever you're printing from. So yeah, so the other one's better, but the other one's more, the Colombian press is more beautiful.
Yeah, what a joy it must be just to be around such an old piece of equipment that is just still functioning, still
Yeah,
producing art.
yeah, still used every day as well. It's great to have it. Yeah.
It's been so delightful to get to know you and to hear your story, and I am just really grateful that you've taken the time to be here. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Beth, and it's been absolutely lovely to talk to you. And thank you for asking such interesting questions as well, because they've really helped me to think.
Beautiful.
I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Suzy. I really enjoyed hearing about her experiences working in collaboration with charities to raise awareness of nature-related issues. This is a really significant way for art to make change in the world. I'm going to leave the links to Suzy's website and social media in the show notes of this podcast. I hope you enjoy exploring her work. Thank you so much for listening. See you next week.